Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review of the latest episode of Loki, The Variant. And I really enjoyed this episode because it kind of went into, well, we got pretty much the reveal of what this Loki variant we're hunting after pretty much looks like, and kind of a little bit more information on how their kind of differences are between their objectives and what the Loki variant that we are running around with's objectives are. Because, interestingly enough, this Loki variant that we're chasing is kind of ahead of the curve and has learned other things, so it'll be interesting to see if at some points the Loki variant that we're following, our primary Loki, might intersect with this one's. So we start off and we're in 1985 in Wisconsin at pretty much a Ren Fair. And you're like, okay, how's this going to go? So we get some TVA agents. The locals are like, you're dressed up in some weird shit, man. Don't you see what's going on here? And they're like, they're responding to pretty much trying to figure out the Nexus event. They pretty much go into this tent and figure out that it's a trap. And one of them gets touched by the Loki variant and their eyes go green, and they're pretty much enchanted and controlled into fighting the rest of their forces. This is like the commander. This kind of fight scene, not bad, a little bit darker for my taste, lighting wise. Again, not on the fucked up lighting maneuvers of Game of Thrones, but it's still a pretty decent kind of like fight scene going on. The thing is, we are probably going to have fight scenes in this, but I'm not going to expect action-level scenes that we had in, like, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and other action-heavy kind of shows. So I kind of give a little bit more leeway, though. Whenever I see an action scene, I would like it to be done as best as possible, because otherwise, why include it? So we get a pretty decent action scene that's also set to, like, I Need a Hero kind of soundtrack going on. I'm like, okay. My only issue with it is that it seemed audio balancing. It seemed that it was a little bit higher music-wise than what was kind of needed, and I'm kind of thrown off. I always kind of had issues with that. Sometimes what happens in shows, you kind of have to watch out because you've got the volume turned up to such a degree to hear the dialogue, and then the music kind of like shifts out of it. The only one that I've really had a gigantic problem with that is like the Sweeney Todd movie, where the dialogue is so soft, and then if you're not careful, the minute a fucking musical number pops into effect, you're like, my ears have bled. It's not that bad, but it's just like, okay, and I'm like, alright, cool. So they're pretty much like beaten up. The controlled one gets like taken and put through, and they have their like tech gadget as well as their like reset charge and taken out. So we see that they pretty much at the TVA are trying to figure out what's going on here. So they bring Loki into their like meeting, Mobius and Hunter B-15, the lady that we had seen in the previous episode. I finally got her kind of designation down. So they're pretty much trying to figure out and give the kind of like lowdown of what they've got on Loki and what they've got to do to investigate this Nexus event kind of thing to figure out what this variant's plans are. And of course they show like other kind of Loki variants which are kind of used more as a comedic effect, but also helps give us information kind of lore. We see like a Jotun Loki. I mean, granted, he is a Jotun, but he's more blue. Cyclist, hulking kind of one. He says that like even though their forms are kind of changed and different, they kind of follow the same kind of key personality traits and usually use illusions and different kind of effects to those, like shape-shifting, double casting, kind of shit like that. And Loki, of course, has to go down into the minute details because they're talking about Loki, and Loki has to be right on Loki, and goes into jargon-heavy, technical jargon of what's going on when he's doing these different kinds of spells, which was kind of funny and also kind of just insightful of what's going on. And they decide to go out, see what's going on. And before this, we had seen that Loki was looking at this jet ski magazine that evidently belongs to Mobius, and we get a little bit more information on that later on. And we get an interesting way for showing and telling. Because exposition, you have to be careful with. So Loki is essentially going through a little training thing with the Miss Minutes thing that we'd seen previously that explained the whole sacred timeline and the timekeepers. She's pretty much explaining that if it goes past the red line, shit goes fucked up, crazy ass, hoo-ha. So you have to reset it before that because otherwise you can't reset it. So it's like, okay, you explain that whole red line thing and what goes on with diverging kind of timelines and multiversal kind of effects. Thank you, and that's important. And it's really kind of funny because they're going through all this training thing. Loki's like, God damn, fuck this shit. And it's like, he understands the importance of knowledge, okay? Loki, granted, has his arrogance and everything, but he is a trickster and the god of mischief. You need knowledge to understand how to be mischievous and how to achieve your goals and act like a general kind of dick. You can't just... Granted, you can brute force your way and just, like, do willy-nilly hoo-ha shit, but usually Loki's understanding of getting that information. So seeing him kind of, like, fight with this kind of semi-AI thing, semi-programmed thing was kind of funny as Mobius is, like, gets him into the briefing room and says, hey, don't fuck with my magazine. So they go to Wisconsin to see what's kind of going on. They try and get, essentially, Loki to figure out what's going on with the crime scene. He starts bullshitting with, like, this whole kind of wolf story and everything. He's like, it's Loki. They kind of know what they're doing, man. But let's see, make sure that I'm okay and maybe get, like, an audience with the timekeepers. It's like, Mobius is able to call it. They're getting closer to the red line. It's like, fuck, reset it. He's just fucking with us. And it was kind of cool to see Mobius be able to kind of, at first, be like, all right, I know he's probably going to bullshit me, but let's kind of see where this goes. Figures out the bullshit at the end and be like, all right, let's rack out. And, of course, he gets back in, talks with the judge, Renslayer, and she's like, listen, tell me why I shouldn't prune that Loki right now. Listen, even though he's being kind of a dick, I think we're getting into the mind of the Loki that we're after, and it'll be important. We also get, interestingly enough, that there are trophies of, like, Mobius's cases that he has solved and everything around her room, which is really interesting because you would think that would be around his, like, cubicle or whatnot, and explain that, like, she sent him on those cases. I'm like, it's kind of a weird little fucking thing to kind of do on, man. So, she's pretty much giving him a chance, but that the timekeepers are watching this. And if it needs to take out that Loki variant. And that they are very, it's like, okay, they got this interesting kind of thing on it. Let's see. Not important tidbits. I mean, I could go and do other kind of stuff. Let's see. Then they're pretty much trying to figure out what's going on. Loki pretty much digs into Mobius, and it's really kind of great because even though they're kind of sitting down, we do get some shifting of angles and everything, but they're pretty much trying to figure out what's going on and what makes each other tick. Loki asking why he likes jet skis. He's like, usually a lot of stuff gets made and then pretty much gets torn to shit later on. But at one point in the 90s, you got form and function jet ski. And the thing is, Loki's like, then why don't you go do a jet ski? He's like, and mess up the timeline and everything. He's like, you're working for this thing that, granted, does protect that, but your reward is to not do this thing that you want to do. And Loki brings up the whole thing of the sacred timeline and the lack of free will. We don't get any kind of satisfactory answer because they are having an existential kind of debate upon what the sacred timeline means, who creates who and everything like that. Him, of course, bringing up the TVA and that Mobius believes in their mission, but you kind of get that there's supposed to be a little bit more to that. Because then Mobius hits back at him and like, well, what about you being created? The Jotuns, Odin, all this kind of stuff that the universe is chaos and that they're trying to impose some kind of order in that. It's like, interesting. Because you can't have unfettered chaos. Because then, even if you work hard for everything that you try and do, you probably potentially won't be able to reap the rewards of that because of just crazy ass chaotic shit going on. Say you make a toaster that could synthesize a cure to cancer by toast. But then for some odd fucking reason, somebody's using chaotic powers or whatnot, and it turns into a fucking tentacle hentai anime girl and, like, thunder thighs the earth into oblivion. That would be kind of just fucked up, and you'd be like, wow, that took a turn that I didn't expect. Neither did I. I didn't even know where I was going with that shit. But doing this in position of order like this and keeping people onto this track with no free will or whatnot, that Loki's got his role that he must adhere to, even if he doesn't like it. Mobius has this role that he must adhere to, even if he doesn't like it. And yet these timekeepers are the ones arbitrating that because they supposedly know better. And that they're trying to figure out the end of the universe and everything is like, well then, Loki's then being like, well, why don't you go back to this point or go forward to that point? What's kind of going on with them trying to suss out? It's very interesting to see this kind of mythology kind of being taken into and brought through with this, because it's very kind of reminiscent of, like, of course, the three sisters of fate in, like, Greek mythology. Everybody's got these lines of their fate, and they snip them and whatnot, and they pass around the side to see what's going on. And I kind of like that, and seeing them suss out with this and being like, yes, this is cool world building that we need, and having these kinds of debates and figuring out what kind of works out with that. So they are pretty much in the cold at the moment, and they are trying to figure out what's going on. So Mobius is like, all right then, Loki, you want to help? You want to do this? I want you to go through all these files on what's going on with this Loki and figure out what's kind of going on. Of course, Loki at first is like, I don't fucking like to do this. He gets shushed in the kind of files library, then tries to pretty much get stuff on the timekeepers in the beginning of time. No avail. But then he starts looking about other stuff. He's like, hey, what files do I have access to? Pretty much all of his files. And then he starts looking at Ragnarok and seeing that it is what happened to Asgard and everything. And you do see, even though he doesn't bring it up, that it kind of affects him seeing what happens to Asgard, because that was Loki's first goal. You know what I mean? To become king of Asgard and rule it. And there is a certain amount that you can kind of see that. Now, granted, he is a power-hungry little dick dude, but yet we can see that he can change. We've seen that in the main MCU timeline. We kind of also see it here. He's still acting like dickhead Loki, but he's now had his world open up to all these different kind of things going on. It's like, holy shit. But he sees that there's, like, no variance there in there. And, of course, he's like, alright, because Mobius went to go get a snack. So he meets him in the library. He's like, listen, the variant is hiding out in apocalypses, because it's the perfect kind of thing, and it's a flaw in the TVA security program. So, whenever you do something, it creates a splitting timeline, and that's a Nexus event. But, in an apocalyptic scenario, you can do whatever the fuck you want, because the end state is that it'll be white. So, say, I don't know, there's an apocalyptic scenario where a giant buttered toast slice hurtles through dark space and is going to destroy the Earth in, like, a day. The variant would go there, could, like, blow up 350 cows, thunder punch, like, 200 grannies, and take a candy cane the size of, like, a continent and fucking smack something on the planet, mind you. And then the pizza toast comes, wipes out the planet. There's no branching timelines from that because the fucking planet doesn't survive. Now, granted, Loki illustrates this by pretty much taking his salad that he was eating, putting, like, salt and pepper and everything onto it. He's like, yeah, I'm putting all this in here. These are all these different choices I'm making. Takes this other dude's drink that we had seen tell us about the whole Infinity paperweights, and it says, they're swiped out. And then Mobius is like, yeah, okay, let's test that theory. So they decide to go to Pompeii, and Mobius wants to be as discreet as possible in trying to do this, because if this goes wrong, they have to do their whole reset and everything. So Loki's like, fuck that noise, starts shouting shit in Latin at the residents of Pompeii, and makes some goats come around, and he's like, yep. And then, of course, Vesuvius erupts. Shit starts going down. He's like, there's no variance. There's nothing going on. It's like, yeah. And then Loki's like, ah. So we get that pretty much scene, and they're like, all right. So now their thing is to narrow down when that could happen. So they're figuring, all right, he pulls out the bubble gum. They figure out it's a range of like 2047 to 2050 something, and they decide to like go through everything. They hit on Alabama in 2050 with a hurricane hitting this rocks cart, giant kind of center that's also got a distribution thing in it. That's a kind of cool little thing because that brings on Roxon's Industries, another kind of like Hammer Industries kind of place, shitty ass corporation. So it's like, okay. So they figure this out. They get together with Hunter B-15 and everything. So they're going to go in there and they're going to see what's going on with this variant. So, or see if the variant's even in there, because evidently this is going to wipe pretty much everyone out. No survivors, no ability to like affect the timeline. So they get in. Loki, of course, dries himself with his magic and everything, and instead of going with Mobius, he goes with B-15, and they're pretty much walking around and kind of seeing what's going on. Of course, they find a dude that's like looking at like plants during a hurricane thing going on. It's like, what the fuck? And she, B-15, then gets possessed by the enchantment, and we start having the then conversation between Loki and the variant that we're after. And the variant we see is able to see everything with on the security feed cameras and everything, and doing their own kind of thing. So it actually makes perfect sense to be in that kind of tech advanced enough for you to do some shit, but not advanced enough to kind of draw attention to yourself. Even though they've gotten to a point where they got themselves with their attention, but we'll have to kind of see what's going on. Mobius and then the other TVA agents are like trying to see what's going on. The other TVA agents are acting like dicks because they want to get their job done. But Mobius like, hey, these people are scared to death. Treat them better. So Mobius does have that kind of like heart. He wants to not be a dick. So, of course, Loki is talking with the other Loki and trying to figure out what's going on. Other Loki pretty much hits on the fact that our Loki is trying to take over the TVA and probably usurp the power of the Timekeepers, but we don't really get that much about what this Loki's goal is. They keep shifting from different kind of bodies as they're talking, and one of them's like, just call me Randy, because that was the body, and like Loki's like, God, now I understand how Thor felt whenever I did my shit to him, which was a nice kind of character moment, because a lot of people do not understand how much of a dick they come off as until somebody does the same kind of thing to them. So seeing our Loki kind of deal with that was funny, but also a nice kind of character moment. It's like, oh, alright. And he's pretty much getting nothing from this Loki, just being like, alright, you'll kind of see. He's like, no, I don't want to do shit with you. I don't need to explain myself to you. I'm just going to do the shit that I want to do. Well, at that point, they pretty much start fighting a little bit because we see that they start setting off, getting ready all these different reset charges. Like, oh shit, they're pretty much going to start taking on the sacred timeline. And we see that Mobius is able to find the one person that was enchanted, who was a commander, and they had evidently told him what was going on and how to get to the Timekeepers. Because, as we've seen, at least with the Loki variant that we've been following, anybody that would learn that the Timekeepers pretty much control everything to this extent would be pissed off and try to take their asses out. Because if they're pretty much putting a whole thing of like fate, and that you're destined to suffer and die in these ways, like this, like the Loki that we had before he became this variant, I would understand trying to burn that motherfucker to the ground. Granted, there can be more of a balance to burning that kind of thing to the ground because we do not know the repercussions of what would occur to that. But if you're pretty much saying that fuck your free will, you can see how this Loki variant can get to that kind of point. So, this is where everything kind of coalesces. We see that this Loki variant is able to have these reset charges, start going through all these TVA little things and being set to different timelines, and pretty much starting to make vast branching effects that sends the TVA into tailspin, and we see the reveal that it is a woman Loki. Now, this is important because, well, she's blonde, and she looks very similar to kind of the Enchantress. And the Enchantress has interesting kind of roots to what goes on in Thor's mythology as well. Because the first one was an Asgardian and had her own kind of different kind of stuff, but she was an enchantress. Then there was a second one that Loki bequeathed powers to, named Sylvie, and we had seen in other kind of translations that that was kind of the name that was given to this character. Now, I don't have any kind of problem. Like, okay, this is probably going to be a woman variant. I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. And I kind of like that it follows more on the line of being kind of like the Enchantress. And I don't have a problem with that. That's a very interesting way to introduce the Enchantress as kind of like our villain here. And there's multiverses. Of course, there's going to be women version, men version, Hulk versions, flower versions, meatwad versions, milkshake versions. Let's see. All different kinds of versions of Loki. So I'm like, okay, let's kind of see which version they go with this here. Okay, more of an Enchantress one. I'm good with that. And the thing is, Loki's not able to kind of get to her fast enough, and she's able to use a TVA portal to go out. And Loki, of course, is figuring out what he kind of wants to do. Does he want to continue on his same path, or figure out kind of what's going on with this Loki variant and what their end game goal is? Because we've seen that the Timekeepers want to keep this sacred timeline, no matter what. This Loki wants to destroy that, and we have to see kind of what's going on with this and what their objective and goal is, because it's a variant of Loki. Granted, it could be evil. Granted, it could have legitimate reasons to be doing this, to attempt to either change the system or destroy the system. Granted, to potentially cement their own power or to kind of do something else entirely. We'll have to see, because we haven't delved into this, because we've just got it more revealed and seen part of their plan go into action. So Loki decides to follow, goes through the portal goes away. That's pretty much where we end this. So I'm intrigued with this because I want to see what this Loki variant... Okay, let's do this. Since she looks like the Enchantress and has kind of like similar kind of power sets, I'm going to call her Enchantress Loki at this point, so that way we can differentiate between Endgame Loki. There we go! Okay, whenever you're dealing with multiples of a certain character, it gets kind of dicey. I do want to see what Enchantress Loki's motivations are, and she's definitely up to shit, and she's definitely thought about this, and has no problem kind of talking what's going on, and even kind of left the portal open long enough for that Loki for Endgame Loki to kind of go through with her. So I'm just liking where this is going and kind of seeing what's going on here. So those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.